It's December 11th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to the Netherlands. The South Korean leader will head to Amsterdam today with a focus on deepening semiconductor cooperation between the two global chip powerhouses. He'll also tour the ASML headquarters, including the firm's heavily controlled clean room manufacturing facilities, becoming the first foreign leader to do so. The National Security Advisors of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan over the weekend reaffirmed the three countries' commitment to strengthen cooperation against North Korea's threats, including nuclear weapons and illicit funding. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says it is the beginning of the end of Hamas, urging the militant group to surrender immediately, while Hamas insists no hostages would leave Gaza alive unless its demands for prisoner releases are met. President Yoon Suk-yeol jets off for his last overseas trip of the year to the Netherlands to forge a semiconductor alliance. Ahead of the 5-day trip, our correspondent Oh Soo-young sat down with the Dutch ambassador for a preview.
Shared values will be at the core of South Korea and the Netherlands' evolving bilateral ties as they cooperate to build resilience against common global challenges. That's according to Peter van der Vliet, the Dutch ambassador to South Korea, ahead of President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to the Netherlands this week. The two countries upgraded their ties to a strategic partnership last year, amid geopolitical and economic tensions in the Indo-Pacific region, where 60% of the world's maritime trade passes through.
We are both top 20 open and high-tech economies that share important values, maintaining a rules-based international order, freedom of navigation, democracy, and the peaceful resolution of conflicts. And these are not just nice-to-have values, they are, in fact, indispensable for our security and our well-being. So during President Yoon's state visit to the Netherlands, we will extend and broaden our relationship further, also into the political and into the security domain. For instance, by strengthening our bilateral defense cooperation and by working more closely together on issues of economic security and resilience.
As microchips are considered the lifeblood of core technologies that enable both economic and military prowess, Yoon told AFP in an interview published Sunday that Seoul plans to significantly boost semiconductor cooperation with major countries like the Netherlands, the United States and Japan. Not only would Yoon's visit enable stronger cooperation between world-leading chip equipment maker ASML and chip producers Samsung and SK Hynix, but van der Vliet says it would also foster links for broader innovation.
ASML is part of a larger Dutch semiconductor ecosystem with interests in Korea. And other Dutch equipment companies like ASM, which makes deposition equipment, and Besi, which makes packaging equipment, are also present in Korea. And the Netherlands is also providing chips for Korean electronics and automakers. So the Dutch semiconductor ecosystem also allows for many startups and small and medium-sized enterprises and knowledge institutes working on innovation and development of the semiconductor industry.
The two sides have also been holding exchanges in other areas crucial to economic security, like batteries, hydrogen, smart agriculture and defence technology, according to the ambassador. Amid concerns of technology being misused and undermining societies, he further underscored the two democracies' shared interest in not only leading innovation, but also establishing multilateral dialogue and norms to address ethical, legal and security concerns, especially in the military domain.
For example, how can we ensure that artificial intelligence distinguishes between civilians and combatants? How does an AI program come to its conclusions? And for example, when targeting, and who is accountable for military decisions. And that is also why we hosted the first big international conference on this issue, called reaffirm 2023, together with Korea. And that is why we are also very glad that the next summit, reaffirm 2024, will be here in Korea.
Going forward, the ambassador placed strategic importance on greater cultural exchanges in areas like film and visual arts.
South Koreans and the Dutch share a close affinity, rooted in the essence of their small yet dynamic nations, and both countries heavily rely on human resources and a shared commitment to finding very innovative and creative solutions to all kinds of challenges. And Koreans and the Dutch are both, I think they're very creative people, and creative people find each other.
Following Yoon's bilateral talks with Prime Minister Mark Rutte on Wednesday, the two will sign deals on key areas of cooperation, likely to include semiconductors, green energy and people-to-people exchanges. Oh Seong, Arirang News.
Over the weekend, the first dialogue between Seoul and Washington, agreed during Yoon's USD visit in April on technology cooperation, took place. Top security advisors of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan also met in Seoul to reaffirm commitments made during a summit at Camp David back in August. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
As South Korea and the U.S. try to upgrade their technology cooperation and modernize the ROK-U.S. alliance into a more comprehensive one, the first next-generation critical and emerging technologies dialogue was held in Seoul on Saturday. It was chaired by the two countries' national security advisors, Cho Tae-yong and Jake Sullivan. This is a follow-up to President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to the U.S. back in April.
At this meeting, the two countries discussed comprehensive cooperation measures in the semiconductors, quantum, bio batteries, and clean energy, and AI and digital fields. They also agreed to hold an informal tripartite dialogue between South Korea, the U.S., and India early next year.
Specifically, some agreements include exploring cooperative opportunities between their semiconductor technology centers and supporting joint research projects between South Korea's Ministry of Science and ICT and the U.S. National Science Foundation. Additionally, they committed to investing at least $10 million in collaborative research in the biosector. In the meantime, on the same day, 4 months after the Trilateral Summit at Camp David between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, Cho hosted Sullivan and Japan's Takeo Akiba to touch base on the spirit and principles of Camp David. Since the summit, North Korea has successfully launched a reconnaissance satellite into orbit, a key discussion topic between the three.
We reaffirmed North Korea's obligations to denuclearize and the prohibition of military cooperation under the UN Security Council resolutions on the North Korean issue. We also agreed to strengthen coordination among the three countries to ensure the thorough implementation of these obligations by the international community.
First and foremost, we've implemented our new commitment to consult with one another in response to regional threats, and we're increasing our trilateral defense cooperation, including sharing missile warning data in real time.
They also reaffirmed the importance of a resilient supply chain and economic security while addressing ongoing issues such as the war in Ukraine and issues in the Taiwan Strait. Cho and Akiba also used strong words to address the topic of fake news.
This was recognized as a challenge and threat to the fundamental matters of operating fair election processes in democratic countries and preserving the foundation of a free and democratic society.
In the meantime, to welcome the two advisors, President Yoon hosted them both at his residence for dinner. While showing gratitude, Sullivan said he visited Seoul while in college and had bulgogi, but could have never imagined having bulgogi with the South Korean president decades later. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
A fresh round of security commitment between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo against North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. Now, how effective will this trilateral effort be in tackling North Korea issues? Let's turn to Dr. Mark Barry this morning. Welcome back.
Good morning, Dami.
Dr. Barry, the national security advisors of the three countries reaffirming their commitment to strengthen cooperation against North Korea's provocations. What's your take on the discussions as a follow-up meetup of the Camp David summit between the leaders of the three countries?
Well, that's exactly right. It was maybe the most important follow-up since the August Camp David agreements And I think more significant than having the foreign minister level or defense secretary level meet, which they have, is the fact that the national security advisors fully reflect their bosses. In this case, President Biden and President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida. So it's the next best thing to their bosses being there. And I think the most important thing that came out of it is continued commitment to do real-time intelligence sharing, which has a very practical and significant impact in times of emergency.
Definitely. And also one of their agreements included tighter trilateral cooperation against the regime's illicit cyber activities that fund the North's nuclear and missile development. Dr. Barry, how effective will that pledge be actually?
Well, it's much like the problem with sanctions and North Korea's sanctions invasion. You have to have everybody on board. And obviously, China and Russia are really not on board. And North Korea has been the most successful it's ever been at cyber theft, crypto theft, and it does it to make money. It's not doing it merely to just grab intelligence. And most of it is being done out of China. And it's being done with the willful cooperation, not just the tacit cooperation of China. And presumably with the theft of cryptocurrency, it's the use of Chinese banks. So unfortunately, it's important to state the policy. It's important to show that everyone's in lockstep. But I think China controls the levers of that kind of activity, and it's in their interest not to stop it right now. So that's the sad truth.
Definitely. We have to talk about also how the U.S. is following North Korea issues. Kurt Campbell, in his Senate nomination hearing last week to become Deputy Secretary of State, he expressed his worries and concerns that, quote, North Korea in the current environment has decided they are no longer interested in diplomacy with Washington. Now, how significant is this admission by a senior U.S. official? What do you think?
Well, this is what other people have been saying who are supportive of the president's overall policies. But the very question that was asked by a Democratic senator during his Q&A session right after his prepared testimony to Kurt Campbell reflected the fact that many of the Senate Democrats are not on board with a policy that does not actually have any kind of diplomatic dialogue. And Campbell admitted that basically since the end of 2019, and particularly it's been all downhill since the Hanoi summit of February of 2019, but since 2020, there's been little to no contact. In fact, he's even admitting that maybe there's not any real contact with the New York Channel, with the DPRK mission in New York. So this is a terrible admission. And it just goes to show that maybe people such as that Democratic senator have a point. But unfortunately, as many people following North Korean affairs are saying, is that the North has probably given up on the United States being willing to cooperate and being willing to make significant concessions and meet them halfway. And unfortunately, that means the future does not bode well over the next term of whoever's the next president.
Right, Dr. Barry, before I let you go shortly, we have to talk about Seoul's unification minister's comment last week that leader Kim Jong-un is in a hurry to showcase his daughter Ju-ae to hint she could be his successor. Is that so? Based on what evidence? What do you think?
Well, she's made 19 appearances, 16 of them with high-level military. Her garb, her costume has gotten better each time. I mean, she looks certainly world-class clothed, and it makes her look older than she probably is, because for all we know, she's only maybe 11, maybe 12 at best. But the thing is, we don't know if he really has a son, and maybe he has a son, but much like Kim Jong-un's older brother, all the son is interested in is listening to Eric Clapton's music. And that's not the kind of person who can become the next leader. Also, Ju-ae, if indeed that's her real name, because we mostly get that name from Dennis Rodman, if she ends up becoming the successor, well, at least you could say she looks like her dad. And her dad had made a special effort to look like his grandfather. So it conveys legitimacy. But at the same time, those who question whether a patriarchal society like North Korea is capable of having a woman leader may not be wrong, but time will tell. But the real question we all should be asking is this possibly convey anything about some uncertainty about Kim Jong-un's health?
Definitely, because it did take some time for the leader Kim Jong-un and his sister Kim Yo-jong to be seen in public. All right, Dr. Barry, thank you as always for your insight. You have a great evening.
Okay, you too. Thank you so much.
At COP28, negotiators are struggling to narrow down their differences over the fossil fuel phase-out. International organizations stressed the world is still off track to limit global warming, despite pledges from climate talks over in Dubai. Shin Se-byuk reports.
At this year's annual UN Climate Summit, COP28, the crux of negotiations is the phased withdrawal of fossil fuel use. The conference is set to end on December 12th, but countries are clashing over the draft of adaptation goals. Some 80 countries have been able to reach consensus on the phasing out of all carbon-emitting fossil fuels. And the UAE, playing host this year, is rolling up its sleeves with high-ranking officials from attending countries to draw up an agreement.
It is our opportunity to deliver an outcome that is based on the science, led by the science, and equipped by the science.
This, however, is facing strong opposition, led by some of the world's biggest carbon emitters, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and China. These countries claim that the conference should only focus on reducing climate pollution, not the fossil fuels causing it. OPEC also openly opposed the formalization of a phased withdrawal and reduction of fossil fuels and emphasized the need for a realistic approach to solving the climate crisis.
There is no single solution or path to achieve a sustainable energy future. We need realistic approaches to tackle emission.
This has prompted wide criticism of OPEC and oil companies, among those advocating for the cutting of carbon emissions by reducing carbon fuels.
OPEC and the oil companies right now are trying to whitewash the crisis that has been created by fossil fuels.
The International Energy Agency, in its report released on Sunday, said new pledges to be made at the climate summit are indeed positive, but will not be enough. The IEA said the world is still off track to meet climate targets to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, despite pledges made by dozens of countries. Climate activists symbolically releasing fluorescent substances into the Grand Canal in Venice, Italy, called for action on climate change. Meanwhile, Azerbaijan will host next year's event, COP29, on the back of support from Eastern European nations from November 11th to 22nd. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called on Hamas to surrender now, calling it the beginning of the end of the militant group's existence. While Hamas has warned there will be no return of hostages without negotiations. Lee Seung-ja has more.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Sunday called on Hamas to lay down their weapons and surrender, saying the Palestinian militant group's end is near. In the statement, Netanyahu said dozens of Hamas militants have surrendered over the past few days. However, Hamas has rejected the claims. Meanwhile, the Palestinian militant group says Israel will not be able to recover any of its hostages unless it engages in talks over conditional swap deals. A spokesperson for the Al-Qassam brigades said in a statement broadcast by Al Jazeera's television on Sunday that Israel will not be able to recover the captives by force, adding there had been a failed attempt by the Israeli military to free one of them. He also noted that Hamas fighters had partially or fully destroyed 180 Israeli personnel carriers, tanks, and bulldozers in the 10 days since fighting began after a brief 7-day ceasefire. The Israeli Prime Minister and Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke over the phone for nearly an hour on Sunday, with the Israeli leader reportedly expressing dissatisfaction with Moscow's stance in the armed conflict. Russia has regularly criticized Israel, including at the UN Security Council, while also hosting a Hamas delegation in late October for meetings. According to Russia's TASS news agency, Putin told Netanyahu that Moscow rejects terrorism but cannot support the dire situation of people in Gaza. Meanwhile, speaking to CNN, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says it's up to Israel and not the U.S. to decide when to end its war against Hamas in Gaza. The comments come as reports of Washington pressing on Israel to wrap up operations by the end of the year. In a show of support, Blinken defended the emergency sales of nearly 14,000 rounds of tank ammunition to Israel and called for a quick approval from Congress for more than $100 billion in aid for Israel, Ukraine, and other national security priorities. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In the English Premier League, Tottenham Hotspur beat Newcastle United 4-1 on Sunday with the help of South Korea's Heung-min. Son turned provider for Italian teammate Destiny Udogie and Brazil's Richarlison on 26 and 38 minutes before scoring from the penalty spot late in the second half. Now, that goal was his 10th in the league this season, meaning Tottenham captain has scored double-digit league goals in each of the past 8 seasons.
Good morning, I'm Kim Seong, and now we turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in the U.S., where tornadoes and thunderstorms across the state of Tennessee on Saturday have left at least 6 dead and dozens injured, while causing major infrastructure damage and power outages. Tennessee's capital, Nashville, suffered 3 deaths, while the city of Clarksville also saw 3 deaths, including a child. Clarksville Mayor Joe Pitts said on Sunday that 62 people have been hospitalized and hundreds of buildings had been made uninhabitable. The city declared a state of emergency, including a 9 p.m. curfew, which will remain until Sunday. As of Sunday afternoon, there were reportedly around more than 50,000 people without power across the state. Tennessee officials' preliminary report stated that 13 tornadoes struck the state on Saturday. Now, the imprisoned Nobel Peace Prize awardee Narges Mohammadi had her prize accepted on her behalf on Sunday by her twin children at a ceremony in Norway's capital, Oslo. Mohammadi, an acclaimed Iranian activist, won this year's Peace Prize for her work fighting against oppression of women and democracy. In a statement read by her 17-year-old children in Oslo, she said the Iranian people, with perseverance, will overcome repression and authoritarianism, and to have no doubt, and this is certain. 51-year-old Mohammadi is currently serving a 10-year jail sentence in Tehran for spreading propaganda. She has been a prominent human rights figure in Iran for years and has been almost imprisoned continuously since 2010. Her husband, who is also a political activist, lives in Paris in exile with their 2 children. Now finally, moving over to sports news. Japanese baseball sensation Shohei Ohtani has signed a record-breaking $700 million 10-year contract with Los Angeles Dodgers. This is the biggest contract in team sports history and makes the U.S. Major League Baseball star one of the world's highest-earning athletes. The 29-year-old has twice been named American League MVP and is seen as one of the best baseball players in history. The Dodgers beat off fierce competition after Ohtani opted to leave his previous team, the Los Angeles Angels, upon expiration of his 6-year contract.
Good morning. After the jacket-free weekend we had, we are waking up to a rainy start to mid-December. It's going to rain all day nationwide, and quite heavily for winter rain. East of Gangwon-do and mountainous regions in Jeju could see downpours into tomorrow, and rain could turn to snow in some of the areas. Meanwhile, the rest of the country will also receive rainstorms into tomorrow morning. But imagine if those rain showers were snow. Temperatures, thankfully, will continue continue to be abnormally warm this week. It's a balmy start to the day, but highs will be 5 to 7 degrees lower this afternoon, meaning today's morning temperatures will not go up much even by the afternoon. Another band of rain is in the forecast at the end of the week, and that will bring bone-chilling temperatures to the country. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day and Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Tuesday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time. Have a great start to the week.